I'm really excited. I'm excited to see how well represented the Virginia Master Naturalists are for this event. That's exciting. So, my name's Robert Fina, Fina Trails LLC. I've been a volunteer trail maintainer for the PATC for over 25 years, and I've been running a trail construction business for the last 5 or so years. So our webinar today is called Trail Management 101, and we're going to be taking a sort of high-level look at managing a natural service hiking trail. And we're going to skim over a lot of topics. It's going to be fairly quick, and I'm going to ask that you hold your questions or put your questions in the Q&A box, and Rebecca's going to read the questions out to me at the end, and we'll answer as many of those as possible. Um, and thanks to Rebecca and the Northern Virginia Regional Commission for hosting this webinar series, and all of you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to tell us a little bit about the commission and how we got to this webinar series. Rebecca?
Yeah. All right, next slide.
Well, it used to work.
Perfect. Really quickly before we get going, we did just have a few housekeeping items. Again, today is in a webinar format, so to involve as many of you as possible for discussions and questions. As Robert mentioned, please feel free to put any questions into the Q&A box during the presentation, and then we'll take plenty of time at the end to respond and take you off mute if needed. Additional commentary, chat can be put in the chat box. But again, to be sure that we can see your questions, if there is a ton of discussion going on, please make sure to put that, again, in the Q&A box. Also, as you probably noticed, we are recording. The recording will be uploaded to NVRC's YouTube page, as well as our website and the Potomac Heritage Nova dashboard following the event. And next slide.
Sorry.
So really quickly, just to provide a little bit of background information on the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, or NVRC. We're a regional council of 13 local governments in Northern Virginia, as you can see on the map to the right. We're just a jump away from Washington, D.C., as well as West Virginia and Maryland, and we span from Prince William all the way up to Loudoun County. NVRC's primary roles and functions really focus on providing information, performing professional and technical services for its members, and really aiming to serve as a mechanism for regional coordination. So with that being said, we provide a wide range of different services based off of local government interests, from human services to environmental planning. And this includes our recreational trails program as well. And this includes specific coordination for the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. And next slide. And I realize that some folks on here know the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail pretty well, but this does provide a little bit of context for why we're primarily just talking about natural surface trails today. So the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail, which we mention as PHNST, POHI, or just the trail, it is a part of the National Park Service's, or NPS's, National Trail System since 1982. And really its aim is to be able to conserve and celebrate the landscapes of the Potomac River watershed. So this spans all the way up from the Potomac Highlands, Allegheny Highlands in Western Pennsylvania, down to the Potomac River in Maryland and Virginia. It's over 900 miles within that complete stretch. And then within Northern Virginia, it's about 140 miles as well. So it really provides a really great resource for the region in terms of economic activity, environmental benefits, social, cultural, historic benefits as well. So we appreciate the number of stakeholders and partners that we even have on this webinar today that I know are very invested in this trail network. And next slide. And so Robert will provide a little bit more detail into this, but partnerships are really key to the Potomac Heritage Network within Northern Virginia. This is a locally managed trail network comprised of local government entities as well as nonprofits. And NVRC's role in this is that we're designated by NPS through cooperative agreements to be able to coordinate the Northern Virginia section of the trail. And we've actually been doing this prior to congressional designation. With that, we also really try to understand the interests and needs of these various stakeholders for the Potomac Heritage Trail, but also the broader Northern Virginia region. And with this cooperative agreement and subtask agreements, we're able to provide special projects and studies in addition to other funding such as the National Park Foundation. And next slide, perfect. And so with funding from the National Park Foundation, we really aim to understand and address the needs of, again, the stakeholders in the region, which is how we've come to our Trail Care Academy program. We heard these stakeholders from our corridor analysis project, as well as our Northern Virginia Recreational Trails Summit. And more broadly, we heard that they need greater resources, education, and tools to be able to support the essential maintenance work that's necessary to sustain the region's trails. Again, the Potomac Heritage Trail and beyond that. So with that being said, this new education series really aims to help the parks and trail managers to plan for and implement maintenance projects and really foster greater stewardship within their communities. In this program, as you can see on the slide here and on the next slide as well, we are covering a range of different topics in relation to trail maintenance and management. And then Robert, if you go to the next slide, just to give you an idea of what that looks like over the next several months. Again, as Robert mentioned, today is kind of a broad overview of that field and that sphere within Northern Virginia and beyond for trail management. At the end of this month, we'll have an additional webinar on invasives identification and management, and that will be led by Rob Lamar, who was the former natural resource management specialist for the National Park Service. You can see we'll have a maintenance funding webinar in July that will focus on identifying, securing, understanding funding for maintenance. And then we'll also have 2 half-day in-person training sessions in June and July. Our first one will take place on June 1st at Basil Newman Park in the morning and covering topics such as trail safety, vegetation management, blazing, blowdown reporting, and other topics that will be really helpful to be able to see in person at the park. So we're aiming to open up registration in the next week or so. This will be limited because it is an in-person event. So if you are interested in taking part in this training, please stay tuned for future emails from me. Or you can stay updated on PotomacHeritageNova.com that has a page specifically dedicated to Trail Care Academy. So a lot of great resources and information that we're aiming to share through this program, and also kind of spurring more dialogue about how we can support each other in the trail management field in Northern Virginia amongst all the various stakeholders and partners that we have. So with that, Robert, I'm going to turn it back over to you to start digging into what this actually means.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm sorry I wasn't a better slide manager. I'll have to practice that. So we have many different land managers in our area on the Potomac Heritage Trail. This map shows the different land manager So along the trail, and this key here shows how many different people we have that are looking after the trail. So one of the goals of our trail management series is to unify some of the maintenance standards. This map provided by Rebecca shows the trail by surface type. So we can see a big section of the trail, the George Washington Memorial Parkway, is actually paved trail. So we're not going to be talking about paved trail, but many of the management issues that we are discussing also apply to paved, non-natural surface trails. So when I think about natural surface trails, I think you can break down the issues into two broad categories. The first is nature, the physical treadway, vegetation, trees, and water. And the second broad category is humans, how they behave on the trail, what information they need to safely and to enjoy the trail, and who's your workforce for taking care of the issues on the trail. We're going to start with some definitions so we're all clear about what we're talking about. So what is natural surface trail? Natural surface trail is the treadway where your feet hit the ground is native soil. It is whatever is naturally occurring in that site. And that can be dirt, sand, gravel, stone, or as in this photograph, bedrock. So the surface can change on any natural surface trail. It can be dirt in one place and stone in another and mud elsewhere. But we're not talking about any kind of imported material. No crushed stone, no concrete, no asphalt. In the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of discussion about sustainable trails. And I want to make sure we all understand what we mean when we're talking about sustainable trails and trail sustainability. What makes one trail sustainable and another trail is less so. So the goals of a sustainable trail, we want it to be stable. We don't want it to change over time. We don't want it to erode or to move in location. We want to have a design that has minimal tread maintenance. That doesn't mean zero tread maintenance, but it can be minimized through good design. And we want to have minimal impact on the environment surrounding the trail. So what are the attributes that make a trail sustainable? So contour alignment is the first. As you can see in this slide here, the trail goes across the hillside rather than steeply up or down the hillside. So it's following basically the contour line, the line of equal elevation. So contour alignment is number one. We want the trail to shed water through outslope and frequent grade reversals. So when it rains, basically we want the water that's running down the hill just to run across the trail and on down the hillside. We don't want it to pool on the trail. We don't want it to be collected on the trail and run down the trail to the point where there's enough volume and velocity to start eroding the trail. So keeping the water off the trail, one way of doing that is tread outslope. It slopes away from the hillside or down the hillside. And the other is frequent grade reversals. So this is a grade reversal. The trail is going downhill, and then briefly it goes back uphill, and then it goes downhill, and then briefly it goes back uphill, and it goes downhill, briefly goes back uphill. So the point is that any water that has collected on the trail and is running down the trail is forced off at this low spot because water isn't going to run back uphill. So these grade reversals prevent enough water from accumulating for that water to have the volume and velocity it needs to erode the tread. So frequent grade reversals. Then our third criteria is mild tread grade, less than 10%. So you can see this trail is not going uphill very steeply. So generally we shoot for less than 10%, which means the trail goes up 10 feet for every 100 feet of horizontal distance or less. And that reduces the speed at which water can run down the trail. It makes it more pleasant for trail users. It's not super hard. And It reduces the chances of people slipping or bike tires slipping or sliding and removing soil from the trail. So those are the attributes of sustainable trail: contour alignment, sheds water, frequent and mild trail grades. So as you may have gathered from the previous slide, water is really the main problem contributing to tread maintenance. And here we're talking about erosion. Water running down the trail removes fine particles, small particles of soil, and leaves everything it doesn't have enough velocity to remove. And so typically that's roots and rocks. And that leaves a rough, unpleasant, and not particularly safe walking surface. When erosion really gets out of control, it starts cutting a gully, and this gully will deepen and lengthen uphill with every rainstorm. And again, it leaves what it can't remove, which in this case are fairly large rocks. Another trail problem is mud, where the trail, where water, excuse me, where water is running down the trail, it causes erosion. Where the water is sitting on the trail, it causes a puddle and mud. So trail users don't want to walk through a mud puddle. So here you can see they've started by throwing sticks and logs down to walk across, but that's insufficient. So they keep going around and the trail keeps getting wider. This is called trail widening, and this increases the area of impact of the trail on the environment. So we don't like it. So the trail is widened, but it's still muddy. So it's not really a solution. So what are the impacts of all that erosion? The chief environmental impact is sediment. All that soil that's removed from the trail washes down the hill and eventually ends up in the creek or the stream in the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. I remember reading a few years ago that the primary pollutant in the Chesapeake Bay is not chemicals or fertilizer or human waste. It's sediment. It's dirt runoff from fields, construction sites, and trails. So all of this sediment in the water degrades the water quality, harming aquatic vegetation and animals. So sedimentation is a big issue. Continuing with definitions, most of the trails in our area are what we call legacy trails. These are trails that we've inherited rather than trails that were designed and built specifically to be sustainable trails. So legacy trails typically are old logging roads, old farm roads, old animal trails, or the shortest distance between 2 points. The problem with the shortest distance between 2 points, when one point is higher than the other, is that it leads to what we call fall line trail. The trail goes straight up the hill exactly the way that water will run down the hill. So once water falls on a fall line trail, it runs down the trail, eroding the trail, and there's no way to get that water off the trail until it gets to the bottom, which is usually the creek or the stream. So trails that have been eroding for a long time end up looking like this. This is a 10-foot deep gully that's all created by erosion. So just to reiterate, we want contour aligned trail rather than fall line trail. And this section of contour trail, and this is not the PHT during last year's drought, but you can see the water, if there ever rains, is going to run down this hillside across the trail and on down. And there are some grade reversals built into this trail. So this is the kind of trail that we're looking for sustainability. This, on the other hand, is a typical fall line trail. It's going straight down the hillside. The water runs straight down the trail and erodes it. And once the trail gets even slightly incised or cupped, the water can't come off the trail, so it's channeled into the trail and erodes. And here you can see it's exposing roots and some rocks and making an uneven tread surface. You can see in this photo that this trail is not particularly steep. So a fall line trail, even if it's nearly flat, will eventually erode because the water has nowhere to go but down the trail. So we have two basic problems with trails. One is the trail is an area that's too flat. There's nowhere to drain the water. And here you can see that problem. There's a giant puddle, and you can see that users are hugging the sides and leading to trail widening. The other option, or the other basic problem, is the trail is too steep. And here you can see this trail is so steep that the stone steps have just migrated and are falling down the hillside, and it's a very uneven, unsafe walkway. So this is not a sustainable trail because it's not stable over time. So what do we do about these problems? What are some solutions? So trail and flat area where there's no drainage. Well, one solution is to create a boardwalk, which elevates the trail user above the wet soil, above the environment. It protects the environment from damage by users, and it keeps the users' feet dry, and they're all pretty happy. Another way to elevate the user's feet above the wet area is to build turnpike. In this case, this is crushed gravel, but it can be soil that's built up and compacted, and it just raises the level of the trail above the surrounding wet area and helps people's feet stay dry. Third option is to build a stepping stone walkway like this. Again, this is a hard, durable, or a firm, durable surface that keeps your feet out of the mud, reduces impact to the environment, and reduces impact to people's shoes. Fourth option is a reroute. Move the trail out of the wet area. So when we're designing new trail, one of our goals is to always have trail on side hill. We want the trail to be on a hillside so it can drain. We don't want it to be going straight up the hill, and we don't want it to be going through the flat area. So a reroute, if there's somewhere to reroute it to, is generally the best option. So this is an example of a reroute. Here was the old trail straight down the hill, typical fall line legacy trail. And you can see the exposed roots and rocks from the erosion that's taken place, and all that soil is washing down into this little creek right here that runs into the Occoquan River and then into the Potomac River. So we closed this trail and we built a new contour line trail, and there's frequent grade reversals and it's outslope to drain. And since we built this trail 4 or 5 years ago, there's been zero evidence of erosion. So relocating the trail is an excellent choice for dealing with fall line trail. This is another example of a trail relocation. The trail used to go straight up here, and we added this switchback, which lengthened the trail but made it less steep. And the switchback has a grade reversal right there for drainage and a grade reversal right here for drainage. So this has reduced the amount of erosion taking place, and there's a little creek right here that was getting all the eroded sediment. So again, reroutes can work well. Another typical trail problem on the Potomac Heritage Trail is bank collapse. The trail runs parallel or right next to the river in many places, which is where people want to be so they can see the river and see what's going on. But when the river floods, particularly on an outside of a curve like this, the flood water undercuts the bank collapses and takes the trail with it. So the only real solution for this is to relocate the trail further away from the bank. You want to be careful that you don't move the trail too far from the bank because people want to walk along the edge. And if you move the trail 100 yards inland, they're never going to use it because they want to walk here along the trail or along the river. So other problems, this is one of my many pet peeves about trails, is people that install a border along the trail, particularly on the downhill side. Remember, our goal is always to have the water flow across the trail and on down the hill. But when you have a border like this, it traps the water on the trail and turns the trail into a drain rather than a trail. So you can see here, even on this very gently sloping trail, the amount of water coming down it has removed all the material from here and carried it down here. So trail borders are not good on sloped trails, and they're not good on flat trails. Here you can see this piece of trail along the PHT lined with timbers has trapped the rainwater on the trail, and no one wants to walk through puddles, so they're going off the trail. You can see the users are walking on both sides of the trail. So that's inconvenient for the users, and it increases the area of environmental damage that the trail is causing. So lining the trail is not good. Just don't do it. If they're there, get rid of them. Other problems. So the PHT runs along the Potomac River and crosses many tributary creeks and streams. And water crossings are probably the most difficult problem to solve in trail building. And here you can see some options that aren't particularly sustainable. There are some stepping stones, someone threw a plank in there. Obviously, that's not going to survive the next flood event. This is Pimment Run. I don't know how you're supposed to get across. Whatever crossing was there is gone. So you've got to wade over to get to the steps on the far side. This is a pretty sketchy bridge that's about to fall into the super eroded gully that's draining the beltway at the Cabin John Bridge. So not all solutions are that good. So what are some other options, some maybe better options? So one is a more serious bridge that can span the creek, concrete footings make it less likely to wash away. These are giant stepping stones. Each one of these stones probably weighs a ton, and they are doweled or drilled with steel rods down into the bedrock below to prevent them from moving. This is on difficult run, and this crossing has existed for several years now with no damage. So it's fairly resistant to flood damage. A bridge like this, which is way above the flood line and will last a long time, is also super expensive. So the calculus is basically that the more resilient and the more long-lasting your structure for crossing the river, the more expensive it's going to be. This required heavy equipment and permits, and a lot of work to get that in. It was very costly, and a bridge like this is millions of dollars. Third option, as you're beginning to see, is one of my favorite choices, is to relocate the trail. Move the trail to an easier crossing point or a place where there's already some type of crossing, like a highway bridge, or just get away from the creek where it's eroding or flooding. Vegetation management is something that trail managers need to be planning for. In our area, the growing season is fairly long and vigorous, and depending on how much sun a certain spot gets and how much water, how moist that area is, it can grow a lot. So we need to be mindful that vegetation management is a necessary annual activity. And why is it important? A bunch of reasons. One is people need to be able to see where the trail is to follow it. And you can see this piece of trail is on the verge of being grown in and not visible. People don't like touching nature, particularly if all this stuff is wet from dew or a shower. They don't like touching nature if it's poison ivy or if it's prickers. Not very popular. You need to be able to see the tread surface to avoid stepping on snakes or tripping over roots or rocks. Vegetation is the vector for ticks getting on people. The ticks hang out on the vegetation, wait for you to pass by and grab onto you, and then you have susceptibility to the various tick-borne diseases. So because ticks can cause disease, keeping vegetation cleared is not only a convenience to trail users, but it's also a public health issue. Lots of people don't know about ticks and they're not using tick repellent. So it's incumbent on trail managers to make sure the trail is kept as clear as possible. And then train operators. We don't want them driving the train down the trail. No, I'm being facetious. We need to make sure that the people that are doing the vegetation trimming understand the best way to do it so they're not giving invasives a toehold and destroying the native species. Trail managers need to have a schedule for mowing and clipping. We know it's going to happen every year. Some years grow faster than others, but there's always mowing and clipping to be done on the trail. So there needs to be a plan and a budget for making sure that happens. Blowdowns are another type of vegetation, I guess. A blowdown is basically any tree that falls down across the trail. And it can either come down in a storm where the tree is uprooted, or it can just be a dead tree whose time has come and it has fallen. The problem with blowdowns is they block the trail, and in some cases, there may be trail users that cannot negotiate this kind of obstacle, and it's a problem. Generally, what happens is a trail is created by users to go around the blowdown, and this increases the area of environmental impact of the trail on the environment. So we want to reduce that kind of problem as much as possible. We want to increase the hikeability of the trail by keeping blowdowns removed, and we want to make sure no one's getting hurt trying to climb over one of these. Blowdowns can be relatively easy to remove, or as in this picture, you can see that it takes a skilled sawyer with a big saw to get rid of the big tree. So you need to know what it is that you are removing and what kind of people and equipment you need to take care of. So you need a process for reporting, inspection, and removal. So as a trail manager, my biggest problem with blowdowns is finding out when they have occurred and where they are. Because unless you're out walking that trail, you don't really know where the blowdown is. So you need some people to be doing blowdown reporting for you. So there are a variety of options for getting information on where blowdowns are. You can have a sign posted that has a phone number or a website that says, report trail problems here. Let us know the location and send a photo or describe the blowdown or the problem. Some of the trail apps have reporting features on the app so your trail users can provide information. Frequent trail users can be inspectors on my trail. I have some trail runners that are out there running the trail fairly frequently, and they know if they come to a blowdown to send me a GPS tagged photo. So I know that there's a blowdown and it needs removal. And your trail maintainers, if you have them, can also act as inspectors and report blowdowns. And if they are trained and if the blowdown is small enough, they can remove it with a handsaw. So whoever's doing your reporting, the most important information is where's the blowdown, and send me a picture of the blowdown so I know what kind of tools, what kind of equipment I need to dispatch and who to deal with a blowdown, whether it's fairly simple with a log on the ground or a complex hung up tree over the trail. So trees provide another problem on trails, challenge, hazard trees. A hazard tree is defined as any tree with a defect and a target. So a defect is anything that causes structurally impairs the tree. So that can be rotted and hollow like this tree. It can be totally dead like this tree. It can blow over in a windstorm because the roots were rotted. So any kind of defect is a hazard tree, or any tree with a defect has a any tree with structural issues has a defect. But if that tree falls in the woods where there's nothing we need to worry about, then it's not a hazard tree because it doesn't have a target. A target is defined as something that we don't want the tree to hit. So our primary target of concern is people. We don't want trees falling on people. And figuring out how to avoid that and what the likelihood of a tree impact is depends on the site. So we're super concerned with campsites because that's where users might be under a hazard tree for 6 or 8 or 10 hours at a time. Whereas if you're just walking down the trail, you might be under that trail for 30 seconds at a time. So anywhere that people congregate is an area of concern. So campsites, picnic areas, porta potties, restrooms, springs, trail intersections, places where people like to picnic, anywhere where people congregate is a potential target. And then secondarily, any kind of structure, bridges, signs, uh, restroom buildings, boardwalks, as shown here, are targets. And so defective trees in those areas are hazard trees. So park management has to have a policy on hazard trees. Either you're going to remove them or you're going to let them fall. Removal can be an expensive process because removing hazard trees requires a fair amount of skill and some specialty equipment, and therefore can be expensive unless you have well-trained volunteers doing that work. C&O Canal had several tree incidents on the towpath a few years ago. So they instituted a policy to remove all the hazard trees that they could, that they thought were within falling range of the towpath. And they've spent a lot of time and money over the last few years removing trees. So their policy was to remove. You may have a policy just to let them fall, but you need to be prepared for the consequences of doing that, which can mean increased structure maintenance and possible injury or death to a user. Our last vegetation issue is invasives. So basically, an invasive is any plant that outcompetes the native plants. And this is such a big and important topic, we're going to have a whole separate webinar on it, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Another category of issues to consider is infrastructure, and parking is one of those infrastructure items. Basically, a lot of people arrive to use the trail by car, and those cars need a place to park. Is there enough space? And the problem is, if there's not, you end up with encroachment on highways. People are illegally parking alongside the road, which can cause traffic issues, or they're parking on neighbors' private property, which gets them upset. If you have parking areas, parking access areas, they also need routine maintenance, and someone needs to be inspecting those parking areas for any kind of maintenance or repairs that are necessary. And to do so, you need to have a budget allocation for that. So parking is not free. The other item of infrastructure, most trails have some kind of structures on them, generally wood, and wood is not particularly long lasting. So here you can see this little boardwalk that's basically just rotted away and people are falling through it. This is a bridge where a tree has fallen or a branch has fallen and it smashed a hole in the bridge. This is another bridge on the Potomac Heritage Trail where the footings have been undercut by floodwater and basically are hanging free in the air. So these types of issues are all safety issues, as you can imagine, to users, increase the park's liability and potential injury to hikers. So there needs to be a process for inspecting trail structures for potential maintenance and safety issues. There needs to be a process for getting the maintenance done on these structures, and there needs to be a budget to support the maintenance. Even if your maintenance is being done for free by volunteers, there needs to be a budget to pay for material. Another area of infrastructure is restrooms. Are you going to have them? If so, who's going to clean them? And how are you going to pay for it? I saw a survey of, I think it was California state parks, and they asked users what their number one concern about using the state park was. And it was not the condition of the trails or wild animals or fire. It was, are the restrooms clean? Are there clean restrooms? So this matters to a lot of users. And I think it has some impact on Potomac Heritage Trail users in the following way. As a leader of a hiking group, I've discovered that there are people that are not comfortable peeing in the woods. And so if they know there's no restroom facilities, or they're worried that there's no restroom facilities, they may not come to use that trail. And so you're excluding a segment of the population from accessibility to the trail. Secondly, that segment of the population that's not comfortable peeing in the woods, I've had hikers that refuse to drink during hot summer hikes because they don't want to have to pee in the woods because they're not comfortable doing that. And so we end up with dehydration medical emergencies on the trail, which is no fun at all. The mother of a friend of mine had a very expensive helicopter ride out of the Grand Canyon because she refused to drink any water on a very hot day on a long hike because she was concerned there was nowhere with any privacy to pee. And that ended up with her collapsing from dehydration and heat stroke. So clean restrooms are not only a convenience for users, it also becomes a public health issue. So that segues into the human issues. And there's a whole list here from graffiti to data management. So we're going to run through these. Litter is ubiquitous in our environment, including in our parks. So what do we do about it? So my observation is that there's three broad categories of litter in the parks. One is poop bags. Dog owners have been very well trained to clean up after their dogs and bagging the poop, but they haven't been very well trained to carry those bags out and throw them in a trash can when they get home. So we end up with a lot of poop bags along the trail. Fishermen, whoops, particularly bait fishermen, some of them tend to leave a mess along the riverbank. The bait cups, whatever they were drinking, snack wrappers, etc. So litter along the river at the fishing site. And then there's the party picnic contingent that's happy to carry in a cooler of beer, but they don't want to carry out all the empties that's left in the park. Observationally, I would say that litter density is directly proportional to proximity to water and distance from the road and parking. So water side activities often involve litter. People are willing to carry a cooler full of beer or picnicking items a quarter mile or so, but they're not likely to carry it 5 miles deep into the woods. So close to the road and parking. And people generally want to hang out near the water. So that's where the litter accumulates. So what do we do about litter? How do we manage that? There are a variety of options, none of which are great. So the first is signage. Remind people to take their trash with them, to not litter. It's important to keep in mind that your signs need to be in the language of your targeted audience. If most of your users do not speak or read English, having all your signage in English is not particularly useful. Trail stewards or rangers are an excellent way to help educate people. So this is not so much in an enforcement mode, but as an education mode. You can have stewards out there saying, hey, do you really want to leave your stuff on the ground? You know that degrades the experience for everyone else. It washes down the river. It's bad for the fish, blah, blah, blah. So you can explain to people why littering is bad, offer them a trash bag, explain to them where they can leave that trash bag, either take it home or put it in the dumpster at the parking lot. So teaching people that littering is not acceptable is an excellent way to reduce the amount of litter. You can have litter cleanup crews. This is addressing the symptom rather than the cause, but you can have a volunteer crew picking up trash, paid staff, conservancy crew, someone to do litter cleanup. And finally, you can have trash cans. Trash cans, I think, reduce the amount of litter, but they don't eliminate it because the diehard littering people won't walk the extra 3 steps necessary to throw it in the trash can. They just don't care. And if you have a trash can, you have to have a system for keeping those cans emptied, hauling the trash away, and you need to make sure that your trash cans are animal proof. Otherwise, the raccoons are going to be in there pulling it all apart and spreading it around. So, whatever options you choose to pursue, trail managers need to have a plan for litter because it's going to be there. Ignoring it just leads to a worse problem. So the corollary to litter is graffiti, another human behavior. And again, generally closer to access points. People that are hiking long distance usually aren't carrying a can of spray paint with them. With one exception. Graffiti tends to breed more graffiti. So if you look at this rock, you can see there's a variety of different ages of graffiti. Some of it's overlaying others. They're different colors, different styles. So there's been more than one person tagging this rock. I maintain a hiker shelter on the Appalachian Trail, and when I took over its maintenance, the inside of the shelter had quite a bit of graffiti on it. And so myself and my helpers spent a lot of time removing that graffiti. And since then, there's been an occasional additional graffiti, someone carving in when they were there, their initials or the usual. But we keep that removed, sanded off, covered up, and generally the graffiti problem has gone away. So my experience is that when people see graffiti, that sort of triggers something in their brain to say, oh, I want to add my little 2 cents here as well. So keeping it clean can reduce the amount of graffiti you have. So how do you clean it up or get rid of it? Chemicals are one option. There's specific chemical graffiti removers on the market. You just need to make sure it's compatible with your work environment. You can use a pressure washer, very effective for getting paint off rocks, but a pressure washer is bulky to carry in and you need a water source. For this kind of graffiti on trees, I usually just carry a can of gray and a can of brown spray paint and just kind of spray, mix it until it's covered up, and that works well. But trail managers need to have a plan for dealing with graffiti because if you just leave it, A, it degrades the experience of users because it's ugly, and B, it breeds more graffiti. So dogs are another issue. Off-leash dogs, and particularly, most parks have a rule that requires dogs to be on leash, but often that rule is ignored. And then there's the whole cleanup after your pets problem. I just yesterday had my final shot in the rabies vaccine series because I got bit by a dog on the trail a month ago. So this kind of drove home to me the issue about dogs. So what do you do about it? How are you going to enforce it? So one way is signage, just remind people what the rule is, and that may help some people. You can try and educate people as to why off-leash dogs are bad. They can chase wildlife, and you can remind people that this is where the wildlife live. It's not your dog's home. Lots of other trail users are intimidated by dogs running up to them, particularly if they're jumping up on them with muddy paws. That can be scary or unpleasant. So signage is one option. Rangers or stewards trying to educate people about why it's important to keep their dog on leash and pick up the poop. Some parks have a violations report number. If you see a off-leash dog, call this number. And I'm unclear what that really does, except maybe it intimidates dog owners into worrying about a ranger showing up and giving them a ticket. So maybe it has some value. But park managers need to make a choice about whether they're going to try and enforce these rules, and if so, how. Other behavior issues, amplified music. There's no shortage of people that think it's okay to walk or run or ride down the trail with their iPhone blasting music or podcast. So having some educational signs about that can be useful. Camping and homelessness, again, usually that's a litter and sanitation issue. Illegal hunting and fishing take place. Taking of plants. I was leading my hiking group through Turkey Run Park a couple of springs ago, and there were some ladies busily digging ramps out of the side of the trail. And I stopped and said, "Hey, you can't do that. This is a national park. Everything in it is protected by federal law. You are a criminal." Uh, and that stopped them, but it didn't stop them from taking their shopping bags full of ramps that they'd already dug and leaving. So plant theft is definitely an issue. And maybe some signage to explain that that's not allowed, particularly in the area of nice spring ephemerals where people are likely to be collecting would be useful. Public land is notorious for being used for drug production, either growing marijuana or meth labs. The people involved in this kind of drug production can be violent, and we don't want them interacting with trail users. So some process for inspecting for illegal use, it's incumbent on the land manager to make sure their trail users are safe. Information is another category in our human issues. How do we get information to users about the trail? Well, lots of people Google the trail before they go out for a hike. So if you have a website that gives them information, that's super useful. Where's the trail? Where's the parking? How many parking spaces are there? Are there restrooms? Provide a map. What are the current trail conditions? When is the trail closed? There's sections of the PHT that flood at high water, and it's super useful to know when that section might be underwater. So the National Park Service has a very good website on the Potomac Heritage Trail with all sorts of information about it. Signage is another typical and the more old school method of getting information to trail users. And then certain apps, phone apps, such as All Trails, have information about the trail, where to park, and maps. So lots of trailheads have a trailhead kiosk with an information sign. And this is an example of one that I think, although it's kind of busy, it covers the four categories of information that I think is important on a sign. So information, rules, wayfinding, and interpretation. And if there's not enough information on this sign for you, there's a QR code so you can get more information for the very curious. So what falls into the information category? I think number one is the address of where you are. If you have an emergency and call 911, the first thing they ask you is, where are you? And if you say, I'm on the Potomac Heritage Trail right before that creek with the big rotted bridge, that's not particularly useful. But if you can give them a street address, they can get to you. And so this also has other important information, phone numbers. Knowing who can use the trail and who can't is useful. Knowing what sort of conditions to expect on the trail. Knowing that the trail is closed to flooding is an important thing to know. This is one of my favorite signs from the White Mountains. It's basically, it says, if there's bad weather, turn around or you will die. So second category is rules, and this sign has a lot of rules on it, but it doesn't leave many questions about what's allowed or not. Again, if you can't speak or read English, this sign is not much use. So these pictographic signs can be somewhat more useful, although I'm not sure what that or what this really mean without the text. This type of sign that tells you exactly what activities are allowed and what activities are not allowed is excellent. Everyone can understand it, although it leaves out a few basic categories like, are you allowed to ride your bike on this trail or ride a horse on this trail? That is unanswered. So rules. The third category is wayfinding. Wayfinding broadly is helping users to not get lost. So this kiosk has a nice trail map with a legend that tells you what all these little symbols are on the map. And I think these trailhead maps are super useful because you can take a picture of the map with your phone, and that way you have the map with you. So if you didn't have a paper map, now you've got a map. And if you're out of cell phone range or internet service, you still have a map on your phone that you can use. So trailhead signage is great. Lots of trails have a sign at every trail intersection with a "You are here" sticker or spot on the map, and that's really helpful to help hikers or users orient themselves to where they are on the map. A linear trail like this, the Dahlgren Rail Trail, has posts, mileposts that tell you how far along the trail you are. So gives you some information about whether you should keep hiking or whether you're just not going to make it and give up. The most typical wayfinding feature is the trail blaze. These are painted blazes or sometimes nail-on placards that are color-coded to the trail, and they tell users, A, that they're on the trail, and if they know what trail color they're on, helps them know that they're on the correct trail. And finally, interpretive signage. Our area is full of fascinating history, ecology, geology, culture. These types of signs can help educate users as well as helping to connect them to the landscape which they are walking through. So we've talked a lot about maintenance issues. Who's going to do that maintenance? I think there are four broad categories: volunteers, paid park staff, some sort of conservancy or job corps, and contractors. So who's going to do the maintenance? This slide is from a presentation at a Trails conference at a talk hosted by the National Forest Service. And the Forest Service claims that they maintain more hiking trail than any other entity in the world. And if you look at this bar graph, it's not hard to believe. This northern region has 11,000 miles of trail. Our region has almost 10,000 miles of trail. But what's important about this is you can see that in our area, the vast majority of the trail maintenance is done by volunteers. So what are the pros and cons of a volunteer workforce? Well, the primary pro is their low cost, or basically free, which is appealing to many land managers and why almost all of the trail maintenance in our area is done by volunteers. Volunteers can be very motivated. They're out there because they like the trail, they care about it, they want to be out of doors, they want to give back to the trail system, so they can be very motivated. They can be very skilled. This PATC trail crew is highlining in material for a stairway, and running a highline is an incredibly complex, technically skilled, and somewhat dangerous activity. So these volunteers are super skilled. Volunteers can be self-supervising. This entire project was planned and executed by volunteers with basically zero supervision from the park. It was an entirely start to finish volunteer effort. Another advantage of volunteers is the flexible employment arrangement. Volunteers come in and do a project or do the maintenance when you need them. When you don't need them, you don't have to care. You don't have to worry about keeping them busy. They're off doing something else. Downsides, you need to provide tools and supplies, and there needs to be a place to store and maintain those tools. You need a volunteer agreement spelling out the volunteers' duties and restrictions. There needs to be a liability and workers' comp that covers volunteers in case of injury or problems. Volunteers can also be very unskilled. This super rickety unsafe boardwalk is something built by volunteers. And so thus they may need more organization and supervision. So it depends on who your crew is. So generally, volunteers are an excellent choice for the routine maintenance, such as vegetation management, keeping drains clear, blazing, picking up litter, keeping an eye on the trail. Uh, Volunteers are great at uh, those types of activities. So managing your volunteer workforce, you need to have guidelines that are clearly understood by your volunteers on what they may or may not do on the trail. They need to understand that any project other than routine maintenance may require an approval from the park, and that approval process may be painfully slow. Someone needs to be providing them tools and equipment and potentially training both in trail skills and in safety. Someone needs to be keeping track of the hours that the volunteers are working and where. And finally, and this is a very sore point with me, is volunteers need to be shown some appreciation by the park or the land manager for all the time and effort that they are putting in for free. In fact, it generally costs people money to volunteer because they need to get spend money on gas and tools and their own supplies. So appreciating volunteers is great. I've been working on trail management for public agencies for over a quarter century, and I can count on one hand the number of times that the park or land manager has done anything to show appreciation to the volunteer crews that are working for them. So that's a big deal. When we finished this project at Turkey Run, the park did a great job at showing appreciation. They had this grand opening. The supervisor or the superintendent came out in full dress uniform, gave a speech. Other people gave speeches. All of these volunteers that worked on the trail were invited. There was food, drink, volunteer appreciation apparel, and other bling. It was a great event, and everyone was really happy, as you can see from the photo. The park did a great job, but this was an outlier event in my experience. Safety is another super important aspect of managing volunteers and really of any trail crew. There has to be a safety plan. And the reason for that is when you're working on the trail, you're far from critical care. If I get hurt working out in my front yard, I'm literally 3 minutes away from the firehouse for the ambulance to get to me and 5 minutes from the emergency room. So if I get hurt, I'm going to have critical care fast. Uh, there's something called the golden hour in trauma, which basically says if you're seriously injured or have a serious medical issue, you basically have an hour to get to the emergency room before your chances of survival start diminishing rapidly to often to zero. So we need to think about safety, how we're going to get people out and how to prevent them from getting hurt in the first place. So one of the ways of doing that is we always have a tailgate safety talk to discuss possible hazards and how to mitigate them before the trip starts every morning. So possible hazards can be things like falling tree limbs, it can be poison ivy, it can be ticks, it can be snake bites, it can be hypothermia, it can be dehydration, it can be heat exhaustion. Anything that is relevant to that weather that particular day and that location. We talk about it and discuss about how we can prevent those things from happening. If someone does get injured, it's vital that there's someone on site that has first aid training and a first aid kit, because providing some initial first aid can increase the likelihood of someone surviving a serious injury. So safety is super important. Another way of preventing volunteers or trail crews from getting injured is making sure that they have the proper personal protective equipment, PPE. So hard hats are a must. There's lots of stuff in the woods that can fall on your head and injure you. People are swinging tools, which can cause injuries. I've seen trail workers, two people bending over to pick up the same rock and they crack their heads together. Uh, if you're wearing a helmet, it's amusing. If you're not, it can be painful. So helmets are important. Safety glasses, there's all sorts of things in the woods that can poke you in the eye and cause damage. And if you're swinging a pick or a sledgehammer, flying rock shards or dirt flying into your eye can cause damage. Eyes are incredibly sensitive, so we need to make sure they're safe. Gloves to protect your hands, proper footwear. People showing up in Crocs or sandals is not appropriate. You need to have some serious boots that are going to protect your feet. If you're running any kind of power tool, ear protection is a must. Loud exposure to loud noise for any kind of period of time can damage your hearing, and hearing loss is cumulative and irreversible. So once it's gone, it's gone. So ear protection is vital. So how do you get your workforce, your volunteer workforce? Well, you can use an existing trail maintenance club, such as the PATC, to organize work trips and to take over maintenance of your trail. You can create your own maintenance group and train them and manage them if that's what you want to do. Uh, there's a platform on the internet called Meetup, which is designed basically for social gatherings. I use it to organize my hiking group and also for work trips. And the advantage to Meetup is that it's super easy to use and it's out there on the internet. So anyone that's Googling trail maintenance or trail work or giving back to the trails or whatever is likely to end up at your Meetup site advertising your work trip. So it's a great way to draw people in from the broader community that you might not reach otherwise. So the next option for workforce is paid staff. So the pros, generally higher skill level. These people are doing the same thing day after day, so they generate some skill. Employees on a park staff generally already have all the payroll issues set up, insurance, supervision. They have their own tools and equipment in place to store them. So all that's taken care of. Downside, there can be variable skill levels. Sometimes these people need training. In this photo, I'm providing training to a trail staff on how to properly maintain by hand a hiking trail. Paid staff has a higher cost, obviously, than volunteers. There can be variable levels of motivation. Not every trail staff member is out there because they love trails. Some of them are just looking for a paycheck. So motivation may be lower. And employment is less flexible. If you have paid employees, you need to keep them busy year round. You can't just pay them when you need them and lay them off when you don't. At least you shouldn't. Another option for workforce is conservancy or Job Corps type organizations. So the pros are cost is probably less than employees per person. They may have a high or higher skill level if this is a type of work that they do frequently. So there are conservancy groups that just do trail building and they get pretty good at it. And they're going to have their own insurance, payroll, supervision, tools, etc. And then another advantage is their flexible employment. You bring them in for a project, when they're done, they leave, you don't have to worry about them. Downside is they may not be that skilled and they may not be right for the task that you want done. So a conservancy group that's used to picking up trash may not be that good for building trails. So you need to know what you're getting. Final option is contractors. So contractors generally have a much higher level of skill. Generally, I've seen some pretty bad work done by contractors. They're going to have their own insurance, payroll, providing their own supervision tools and equipment. Generally, they're motivated, they like what they're doing, and they want to get the job done and get paid. Contractors can also provide you with the technical expertise that you may not have. so they can provide options for fixing problems. And again, flexible employment, you hire them when you need them. When you don't, they go away. It's not your problem. Downside, higher cost, but not necessarily lower value, because it's often cheaper to do something right the first time than to do it wrong over and over and keep paying for it. They may not be right for all tasks. You may not want to hire a highly skilled construction crew uh, to mow trail or clean bathrooms. There can be procurement challenges, uh, getting budget allocation, submitting RFPs, reviewing bids, making sure your contractors are licensed, insured, all of these issues. And then the manager needs to have more expertise to supervise a contractor, because typically the contractor is doing a more technically challenging task than the volunteers. So you need to have someone that knows what's going on to understand if the contractor is doing what they need to be doing and what you've paid them to do, and if they're doing it right. So generally, contractors are more interested in doing discrete job than routine maintenance, but that's not always the case. Whoever is doing your work needs to be aware of the National Environmental Policy Act, which says that basically any kind of major undertaking on public lands needs to have an assessment done for environmental and cultural impacts. Particularly in our area that's so replete with history, often there's an archaeological component to major projects. So we need to make sure that regardless of who's doing the work, the environmental compliance is taking place before the work starts, and hopefully the land manager knows the rules and the process for doing that, and if they don't, they need to find out about it. Trail managers need to have an emergency plan, and they need to have coordinated with responding agencies so that there is a plan. The responding agencies need to know where the trail is, how to get to it, what are the key road access locations, do they have keys to the gates that access the road. In this helicopter rescue I was involved in on the Appalachian Trail, the fire department couldn't get anywhere near the trail because there was a locked gate and they didn't have a key and they didn't want to break down the gate. So the helicopter came in, but the helicopter had a heck of a time finding us because we didn't have smoke grenades or ground panels. We're in the woods. All they had to look for was a bunch of people jumping up and down, waving and yelling. So having airlift locations mapped would be useful for responding agencies. The PHT is along a river, which also provides waterborne emergency access, but the responding agencies need to have those access locations marked. Where's the trail near the river, and where is there a place where you can get from the river up to the trail? Much of the bank, as we saw in some of those previous photos, is a steep mud bank and not conducive to rescue. Another option is to have trail markers that are GPS tagged to a map that the responding agency has. So in this case, if I call 911 and I say I'm at point A and I am having an anaphylactic reaction to bees and I'm running away from them, I broke my leg and now I think I'm having a heart attack, they know, and I'm at point A on the trail, they know where that is, and they've already figured out the best way to get to that point to affect a rescue. So having this kind of planning, figuring out in advance, can save lives. Remember, when someone's injured on the trail, getting to them quickly is super important. And if you don't have a plan figured out in advance, it's going to be too late. User data is super useful for trail managers to know how many users you have, when they're using the trail, and what type of user they are. So remember, we talked about hazard trees. Do you have one hiker, or do you have 1,000 hikers on that trail every day? And if you don't have the data, you don't really know. So a trail counter is super useful for counting how many people on the trail, and it tells you exactly when they've passed that counter. What it doesn't do is tell you what kind of user it is on the trail. So is it a hiker, a biker, a horse, etc. So usually that means a person sitting there and counting and tabulating the data. So when we think about hikers, we usually think, oh, someone walking down the trail with a backpack like these people. But I was out on the trail the other day and I saw these two different kinds of hikers, both with wheeled vehicles. This guy was sort of a walker and this guy pushing a cart. The kids, or the toddlers at this point, were walking, but I'm guessing at some point they end up in the cart. So if you have users like this, you may want to be thinking about, is my trail surface conducive to this kind of use or not? So that's another way that user data can be helpful. And having data on your trail can be super useful for allocating resources and budgeting. Trail A has 1,000 users a day. Trail B has 1 user a year. Which one are we going to spend the money on? So resources or additional resources, we've hit everything very high level. So here's some places where you can dig in deeper for more information. The U.S. Forest Service Trail Maintenance and Construction Notebook was just updated this year. From what I've seen of it so far, it's really good. So I recommend that highly for sort of trail maintenance, trail construction issues. American Trails, their website has a massive amount of information about all three things trails related, not just construction and maintenance, but economic topics, diversity and inclusion, signage, just basically everything. So these are all good resources if you want to dig in a little deeper. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to start asking questions. If there have been any, maybe I've been so thorough there are none. But I'm always interested in talking about trails. So if anything doesn't get answered or you want more information or advice or anything, here's my email address if you want to contact me. All right, Rebecca.
Thank you, Robert. We have had a few questions put into the Q&A and also some good chat and commentary based off of your presentation as well. So thank you, everybody. But let's see, just to kick us off with the first question that we received from Karen. In a 10-foot flat wet area, would stepping stones be the best solution?
Well, it's a solution. It depends if you have big stones handy. Stepping stones are going to last longer than, for example, a wooden boardwalk. Once they're there, they don't tend to disappear. So stepping stones is a great solution. I would say yes, unless you can figure out how to reroute the trail around the wet area so you don't have to deal with wet at all.
Next question is from Brianna. Do you have recommendations for keeping folks off old trails that you've already closed or relocated? It's a great
That's an excellent question,
yeah.
and I should have touched on that. The best way to get people to stop using an old trail is to make it disappear. And typically what I see is someone's thrown a few branches across it and think that's going to block trail users from that trail, and that just doesn't work. You need to cover the trail completely with leaves, basically, so it's invisible, brush, rocks, stumps, drag some trees across if you can. Basically, the trail that you're trying to close has to be indistinguishable from the surrounding woods. So you've really got to spend a lot of effort making it go away. Good question.
Next question is from Dan. Can you recommend some ways to get experience maintaining trails? It's also a good question.
So another excellent question. The best way I believe, to get experience maintaining trails is to do trail maintenance. And you can either self-train by looking at some of these resources that are online and that I showed you on that last slide, or go out with one of the experienced trail crews. PATC has spent a lot of time and effort in the last few years trying to upgrade the professionalism of their crews and their understanding of trail dynamics. So if you go out with a professional trail crew, or not a professional, but a trained trail crew, you're going to learn a lot about trail management, trail building quickly. So I would say that's an excellent way of getting experience.
And I would just piggyback off of that, Dan or others. There's a number of good crews, PTC, especially within this region. But if there's a specific area that you're thinking of in particular that you live within Northern Virginia, definitely feel free to shoot NVRC a message, as we've worked with a lot of these on various programming. So awesome question. Another question from Karen, best way to remove graffiti cut into trees?
Hmm. I'm not sure there's a good way to remove graffiti cut into trees because anything you try to do is going to damage the tree further. Uh, so one way, and if you're talking about beech trees, which graffiti on beech trees tends to be ubiquitous and has been done since time immemorial. I don't think there's any way really to address that unless you put some sort of covering over the tree to prevent people from carving in it, wrap it in chicken wire, which may or may not be a worse solution than the problem. You can try spray painting with a paint color that matches the tree. Uh, that's kind of a halfway issue or a halfway solution. I think the reality is there's no good answer that I know of.
Margaret asked, what is the best time of year to build trails?
Hmm. That's a good question too. So summer is a rotten time to build trails because around here because it's too hot, and sort of late winter and spring it can be too muddy. Fall is a great time to build trails because the temperature's nice, the soil's not too dry, not too wet, and when we're building trails, we want to cover up all of the spoil, all the dirt that we dig out from trails with leaves, and in fall is when all the leaves have fallen and they're available for covering things up. So I would say fall is my preference or early winter. Once the ground freezes, it gets a little more dicey.
And then a question from Rick. How do the rules of maintenance change in wilderness designated areas? Any input on that?
Well, so wilderness designated areas means that you can't use any kind of power tools or mechanical conveyance. You can't use chainsaws or weed whackers. So basically, everything has to be done by hand. Although there's some weird exceptions. You can't use a wheelbarrow, but you can use a grip hoist, which is a hand operated winch. So it's mechanical, but it's not power operated. Uh, so if you're working in a wilderness area, you need to know how to use a crosscut saw. You need to know how to use a swing blade if there's mowing that needs to be done. And then most of the basic trail maintenance is the same type of hand tools that you would use anywhere else, picks and shovels and McLeods and rock bars. Good question.
Well, that's all we have in the Q&A. Maybe we'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes. Oh, there we go. Okay. Um, our Rails to Trails Trail, the DRHT, is yet to be made into a state park. 15 miles of maintenance is being accomplished by volunteers, but our trail owner seems to think it's okay to bulldoze drainage gutters on the side of the trail, as miles of amphibians and wildlife using the shallow ditches. We want to keep it unpaved. How can you help convince him and potentially others of seeing the benefits of leaving much of it alone?
That's more of a political and sociological question. I think that may be out of my area of expertise. Um, Generally, if you want to convince someone of doing something, you've got to convince them of why it's beneficial to do it differently than what they're doing. So people generally aren't don't accept don't accept criticism well, but they may accept some educational or alternative viewpoints depending on how open-minded they are. So providing an alternative viewpoint diplomatically, I think, is a real challenge. So I think you've got an issue, and I think you've got a challenge ahead of you there. Good luck.
Yeah. Agreed. We'll give it one or two more moments, but as we're waiting for any final um, questions in the chat, just a reminder that this will be posted to the PHNST dashboard in the next day or so. As you're leaving this meeting, Zoom also has a survey that we would very much appreciate if you could take to help us improve these webinars in the future. And really any additional feedback or questions that you have, feel free to put them in the survey. However, Robert's email is right there. My email was, I believe, included within the registration, but I can also put it in the chat right now. But again, we really appreciate so many folks taking the time to attend today. And really good questions. So I'm glad everybody was engaged and hopefully found it useful. But I think that's all, and that actually wraps it up pretty nicely to almost 2:30 on the dot. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.